In this lesson, I'm going to tell you how to annualize volatility. Annualizing volatility means extrapolating a standard deviation of log returns calculated at some time frequency to a standard deviation of log returns calculated on an annual frequency. I want to give you more intuition for what the annualized volatility represents. Usually, when you calculate volatility, you have a small price series. You cannot calculate the standard deviation of annual log returns because you don't have several years of data. Now, if that price series were to continue to generate prices for many years such that the mean and the standard deviation of the log return distribution remained the same, and you calculated the standard deviation of the annual log returns, you would get the same number as you would get by annualizing the standard deviation of log returns of another time frequency. So, the way to annualize the daily standard deviation of log returns is to multiply by the square root of 252, the number of trading days in a year. Similarly, to annualize the monthly standard deviation of the log returns, you multiply by the square root of 12, the number of months in a year. Why the square root? Why not just the number of days? This is what we're going to explain now. An important fact we need to remember for this calculation is that log returns sum over time. As a quick refresher, if we have price data for 3 times, we can see that if we add the log return for the first period and the log return for the second period, we get the log return for the entire time period, the natural log of P3 divided by P1. Now let's look at the case of annualizing monthly log returns. If R is the log return, we know that the log return for the year is the sum of the log returns for each month. Now, let's think of each monthly log return as a random variable. This just means that it's a quantity that represents the outcome of a random phenomenon, and the likelihood that it takes different values can be represented with a probability distribution. In fact, let's make a few important assumptions. First, we'll assume that the random variables representing the log returns for each month have the same distribution. Second, we'll assume that they are independent. So the log return you end up with for one month doesn't depend on the log return for any other month. Let's think of the annual log return as another random variable. The sum of the monthly log returns equals the annual log return. Recall what it means to sum random variables. You can generate the distribution of the sum by repeatedly taking sets of samples from each of the constituent distributions and summing them. Okay, we've set up the situation, but let's remember our goal. We want to relate the standard deviation of the distribution of monthly log returns to the standard deviation of the distribution of annual log returns. So now we're going to use a key fact that is true whenever you sum independent random variables, that the variance of the sum equals the sum of the variances. Getting back to the calculation, we know the variance of the annual log return equals the variance of the sum of the monthly log returns. Since we assumed that the monthly log returns are independent, we have that the variance of the annual log return is the sum of the variances of the monthly log returns. Variance is just the square of the standard deviation, so we can write it as sigma squared. But we also assumed that the standard deviations of the monthly log returns were all the same value, sigma month, so we end up with 12 factors of sigma month. When we take the square root, we see the relationship between the standard deviations. So you now see how you can annualize the standard deviations of the monthly log returns. You multiply by the square root of 12. In a nutshell, this arises because you can sum the variances of independent random variables. Similarly, if you want to annualize the standard deviation of weekly log returns, you multiply by the square root of 52, the number of weeks in a year. And if you want to annualize the standard deviation of daily log returns, you multiply by the square root of 252, the number of trading days in a year.